I own 40 acres of dry Texas land, and I drilled my well the legal way. That's why the president of our water district froze when he found out who I really was. He thought I was just another rancher he could push around. He was wrong. What happened next cost him his title, his reputation, and every ounce of authority he thought he had over me. My name is Walter Combs. I'm 61 years old. I've lived on this land outside a small county in West Texas for over 20 years. I raise cattle, I grow hay, I mind my own business. 3 years ago, I applied for a well permit the right way. I filed the paperwork, I paid the fees, I waited the required time. The permit was approved and recorded with the county. I never expected that piece of paper would matter as much as it did. I never expected a man named Russell Dade, president of our local water improvement district, would try to take my water rights away from me. And I never expected that I would be the one holding the real authority the whole time. This is the story of how that happened. Life on my land was quiet before any of this started. I woke before sunrise most mornings. I fed the cattle. I checked the fence lines. I walked the property just to listen to it. My well sat near the north pasture, close to an old mesquite tree my father planted before I was born. That well gave me clean water for my herd and my house. It never ran dry, not even in the worst summer heat. I kept my permit in a folder in my desk drawer. I never thought I would need to show it to anyone. Around here, a permit is a permit. Nobody questions a man who followed the rules. My neighbors were mostly ranchers like me. We waved at each other on the road. We helped each other during calving season. Nobody bothered anybody else's water, land, or business. I paid my taxes on time. I renewed my permits when required. I kept records of everything because that's how my father raised me. He used to say, "Paper outlives memory, Walter. Keep your paper straight." I didn't know yet how much that advice would matter. I had heard of Russell Dade before, mostly through town gossip. People said he liked control. People said he liked being obeyed. I had no reason to interact with him. My well was legal. My paperwork was clean. I figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in early spring. I was out checking the water pump near the north pasture when I saw a white truck parked at my gate. The county seal was on the door. I did not recognize the man standing beside it. He was tall, maybe 50 years old, wearing a pressed shirt that did not belong on a ranch. He had a clipboard in his hand and sunglasses pushed up on his head like he wanted people to see his eyes clearly when he spoke. "You Walter Combs?" he asked. "That's right," I said. "I'm Russell Dade, president of the County Water Improvement District." I nodded and shook his hand. I had no reason not to. "I'm here about your well," he said. "We've had a complaint." That surprised me. Nobody had ever complained about my well. I asked him who filed it. "That's confidential," he said. I told him my permit was on file with the county, filed and approved 3 years earlier. He said that didn't matter because the district had updated regulations that required a new inspection for any well drilled within a certain distance of a shared aquifer boundary. I asked to see the regulation in writing. He said he would get it to me. He walked to my well without asking permission. He looked at the casing. He looked at the pump. He wrote something on his clipboard. "This well may be in violation," he said. "I'd recommend you shut it off until we sort this out." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice calm. My father taught me that anger loses arguments, documentation wins them. "I have a permit," I said, "filed and approved. I'm not shutting off my water based on a verbal claim." Dade looked at me like I had said something offensive. "I am the president of this district," he said. "I set the rules here." I told him that permits are governed by state water code, not personal preference. He didn't like that. He told me I would regret my attitude. Then he got in his truck and left without giving me anything in writing. I stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle behind his truck. I walked back to my house and pulled my permit folder from the drawer. I made a copy that same day. I wrote down the date, the time, and every word Dade had said to me while it was still fresh in my memory. I did not know it yet, but that was the first entry in what would become months of documentation. 2 days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No envelope with a return address, no official letterhead, just a single typed page, unsigned, claiming my well was under review and that I should cease agricultural water use until further notice. I read it twice. Then I set it beside my permit copy and compared them side by side. My permit had a case number, a county seal, and a signature from the district clerk. The letter had none of that. It wasn't even on district letterhead. I called the county clerk's office the next morning. I asked if there was any official review open on my well. The woman who answered checked her records and told me she found nothing. No case number, no filing, no formal complaint on record. I asked her directly, "Does Russell Dade have the authority to shut down a permitted well on his own?" She paused before answering. "Not without a board vote and a formal notice," she said. "That's not how it works." That told me everything I needed to know. Dade was acting outside his authority, and he was hoping I wouldn't check. I thanked her, hung up the phone, and sat at my kitchen table for a while. I thought about my father's advice again. Paper outlives memory. I decided right then that if Dade wanted to fight this with intimidation, I would fight it with documentation. I started a folder, not the old one, a new one, dedicated only to this. I labeled it Well Permit Dispute. I placed the unsigned letter inside it, along with my notes from the clerk's call, dated and timed. I did not call Dade. I did not confront him. I decided to wait and watch. If he wanted to escalate, I would let him show his hand first. My father always said the man who talks least in a dispute is usually the one who wins it. I went back to my chores that day like nothing had happened. But inside, I knew this was only the beginning. A week passed with no word from Dade. I kept working the land, but I stayed alert. I checked my mailbox every day. I kept my phone close. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, I got a call from my neighbor, Hank Reyes. Hank ran cattle on the property just east of mine. "Walter," he said, "you hear about the meeting?" "What meeting?" "District board meeting, tonight. Somebody told me your well is on the agenda." I hadn't received any notice. No mail, no phone call, nothing. I asked Hank how he knew. "My cousin's on the board," he said. "She told me. Said Dade's pushing to have your permit revoked." I thanked Hank and hung up the phone. My hands were steady, but my mind was working fast. If Dade was trying to revoke my permit through a board vote without notifying me, that was a due process problem. Landowners are required to receive notice before any action affecting their water rights. I called the district office myself. A young man answered. I asked if there was a meeting that evening and whether my name was on the agenda. "Let me check," he said. After a pause, he said, "Yes, sir, item 4, well permit review, Combs property." I asked if I had been sent a notice. "I don't see one logged," he said. I thanked him and hung up. I looked at the clock. The meeting started in 3 hours. I did not panic. I got dressed, grabbed my folder, the one with the permit copy, the unsigned letter, and my notes from the clerk's call, and I drove into town. The meeting was held in a small brick building behind the courthouse. I walked in a few minutes before it started. I saw about a dozen people in folding chairs, a long table up front for the board, and Russell Dade sitting at the center chair like he already owned the outcome. He saw me walk in. His face changed for just a second, surprise, maybe irritation, before he covered it with a tight smile. "Mr. Combs," he said, "didn't expect you tonight." "I heard my well was on the agenda," I said. "I have a right to be here." He didn't argue. He just nodded and looked back down at his papers. I took a seat in the back row and waited. I didn't say another word until it was my turn. The meeting opened with routine business, budget reports, a discussion about a broken gate at the district pump station. I sat quietly and watched Dade run the room. He spoke fast. He interrupted people. Nobody pushed back. Then the chairwoman called item 4. Well permit review, Combs property. Dade stood up. He held his clipboard like a weapon. "This well was drilled too close to a shared aquifer boundary," he said. "I inspected it myself. I recommend the board revoke the existing permit pending a full review." A woman on the board, older, with reading glasses pushed low on her nose, asked, "Was the landowner notified of tonight's meeting?" Dade hesitated. "I believe notice was sent." I stood up. "No notice was sent to me," I said. "I confirmed that with your own office this afternoon. I also confirmed there is no open case number for this review, and no board vote has ever authorized an inspection of my property." The room went quiet. The chairwoman looked at Dade. "Is that true, Russell?" "I used my discretion as president," he said. "I don't need a vote for a site visit." "A site visit is different from revoking a permit," the older board member said. "You can't do that unilaterally." I stepped forward and placed my folder on the table. "This is my permit," I said. "Filed and approved 3 years ago, case number included. This is a letter I received in my mailbox last week. Unsigned, no letterhead, no case number, threatening to shut off my water. And these are my notes from a call with the county clerk, who confirmed no formal complaint exists against my property." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The papers spoke for themselves. The chairwoman looked through my folder for a long moment. Then she looked at Dade. "This board did not authorize any of this," she said. Dade's jaw tightened. "I was protecting the aquifer," he said. "You were protecting your ego," Hank muttered from a few rows over. A couple of people chuckled, but I stayed silent. I didn't need to add anything. The board could see it for themselves now. The chairwoman tabled the item and said the board would review the matter properly with formal notice at the next scheduled session. Dade sat back down, his face red, saying nothing else for the rest of the meeting. I gathered my folder and walked out into the parking lot. Hank caught up with me by my truck. "You handled that clean," he said. "Wasn't hard," I said. "I just told the truth and let the paper prove it." But as I drove home that night, I knew this wasn't over. Men like Dade don't back down after one public embarrassment. They dig in. I decided I needed more than a folder. I needed a real paper trail, built the right way, from the ground up. The next morning, I sat down at my kitchen table with a fresh legal pad and started planning. I decided I would not just react to Dade anymore. I would build a case, piece by piece, the way a man builds a fence, post by post, checked twice, strong enough to hold weight. First, I drove to the county courthouse and requested certified copies of my well permit. Not photocopies from my own drawer, certified copies, stamped by the clerk, with a raised seal. I wanted paper that could not be argued with in any room, in front of any board, in front of any judge if it came to that. The clerk who helped me, a woman named Dolores, remembered my visit from the week before. "You're the well permit fellow," she said. "The board's still talking about that meeting." "I need this done right," I told her. "Certified copies, everything official." She pulled the file, made the copies, stamped each page, and logged my request in the county system with a timestamp. I paid the small fee and thanked her. Next, I drove out to the State Water Development Office, 40 minutes away, and requested the aquifer boundary maps for our region. I wanted to see for myself whether my well was anywhere near the boundary Dade claimed it violated. The maps took a few days to process, but when they arrived, they confirmed what I already suspected. My well sat nearly 2 miles from the nearest boundary line Dade had referenced. 2 miles, not even close to any gray area. I made copies of those maps too and filed them in my growing folder next to my permit. Then I did something I had never done before. I bought a small trail camera, the kind ranchers use to watch for coyotes near the herd, and I mounted it near my well. Quiet, hidden in the mesquite branches, pointed at the gate and the pump. I wasn't trying to trap anyone. I told myself that at the time. I just wanted a record, in case anyone else showed up on my land without permission, the way Dade had before. I also started keeping a daily log. Nothing fancy, a simple notebook where I wrote the date, the weather, and anything unusual I noticed on the property. My father used to keep a log just like it for cattle births and vet visits. I figured if it worked for calves, it could work for this. A week into my documentation effort, I got a call from Dolores at the courthouse. "Walter," she said, her voice lower than usual, "I probably shouldn't say anything, but I think you should know. Russell's been in here twice this week, asking to see your permit file." That stopped me cold. "Did you let him?" "Public record," she said. "I couldn't stop him. But he wasn't just looking. He was asking about the filing date, the survey coordinates, things like that. Seemed real interested in finding some kind of error." I thanked her for telling me, and I wrote it all down the moment I hung up the phone, the date, the time, and exactly what she had said. I understood then that Dade wasn't done. He was looking for a technicality, some small mistake buried in old paperwork that he could use to justify what he'd already tried to do without one. I decided I needed to check my own file just as carefully as he was checking it, before he found something first. That night, I spread every page of my well permit file across my kitchen table. I read each line slowly, the way my father used to review a cattle contract before signing it. I was looking for anything Dade might use against me, a wrong date, a missing signature, a coordinate that didn't match the survey. I found nothing. The permit had been filed correctly. The survey coordinates matched the state maps I had already collected. The signature and seal from the district clerk were both in order. Whatever Dade was hunting for, it wasn't there. Still, I wanted a second opinion. I called an old friend, a retired land surveyor named Elias Vance, who I trusted more than most lawyers I'd ever met. Elias came out to the ranch that weekend and walked the property with me. He checked the well location against the legal description on my permit. "This is clean, Walter," he said, standing near the mesquite tree. "Filed right, located right. Whoever's telling you different is lying or doesn't know what he's looking at." I asked Elias if he would put that in writing. He agreed, and a few days later he sent me a short, signed letter confirming the well's location matched the permit exactly. I added it to my folder. Around that same time, I decided to request something else: the district's own bylaws, in writing, spelling out exactly what powers the president's office actually held. I filed a formal request with the district office under the state's open records law. It took nearly 2 weeks, but the documents came. I read through them carefully at my kitchen table one evening, cup of coffee going cold beside me. The bylaws were clear. The president could conduct site visits. The president could recommend action to the board. But the president could not unilaterally order a well shut down, could not issue notices without board approval, and could not act outside a formal complaint process. Everything Dade had done so far, the unannounced visit, the unsigned letter, the attempt to slip my well onto a board agenda without notifying me, broke his own district's rules. I added the bylaws to my folder, now 3 inches thick, organized by date, tabbed by category. Permit, correspondence, maps, surveyor letter, bylaws. I sat back that night and looked at what I'd built. It wasn't anger driving me anymore. It was patience. My father used to say, "A fence built in a hurry falls down in the first storm." I wasn't going to hurry this. I still didn't know exactly what Dade would try next, but whatever it was, I intended to be ready for it, with paper that could stand up in any room he chose to fight in. 3 weeks after the board meeting, I received an actual letter, this one official, on district letterhead, signed by the board secretary. It stated that a formal hearing had been scheduled to review my well permit, and that I had the right to appear with evidence and representation. I felt a small measure of relief reading it. This was how it was supposed to work from the start. I marked the date on my calendar and began preparing. I decided not to hire a lawyer, not yet. I had watched enough of these small county disputes to know that a calm landowner with clean paperwork often did better in that room than a nervous man with an expensive suit standing behind him. I wanted the board to see the evidence, not a performance. The hearing was held on a Monday morning in the same brick building as before. This time, the room was fuller. Word had spread around town about the well dispute, and a few neighbors came to watch, including Hank. Dade sat at the front table again, but something about him looked different this time, less certain. He kept adjusting his papers, glancing toward the door like he was waiting for someone. The chairwoman opened the hearing and asked Dade to present his case first. He stood and repeated much of what he'd said before: concerns about the aquifer boundary, concerns about unregulated drilling, concerns about protecting the water table for the whole district. Then he said something new. "I have reason to believe Mr. Combs' original survey was inaccurate," he said. "I'd like the board to order a new survey at his expense before any permit is reaffirmed." I felt my pulse pick up, but I kept my face still. This was the technicality Dolores had warned me about. He was trying to force a costly new survey, hoping either I couldn't afford it or that some clerical error would surface that he could use against me. When it was my turn, I stood and opened my folder. "I have a certified copy of my original permit," I said, placing it on the table. "I have the state aquifer boundary maps, which show my well nearly 2 miles from the nearest boundary line Mr. Dade referenced at the last meeting." I placed the maps down next to the permit. "I also have a signed letter from a licensed surveyor, confirming my well's location matches my permit's legal description exactly." I placed that down too. "And I have a copy of this district's own bylaws," I said, "which state clearly that the president's office does not have authority to unilaterally order inspections, issue shutdown notices, or place items on a board agenda without formal complaint and proper notice to the landowner, all of which happened to me over the past month." The room went very quiet. The chairwoman looked through each document slowly. Dade shifted in his seat. "Mr. Dade," she said finally, "did you file a formal complaint before visiting Mr. Combs's property?" "I used my judgment," Dade said. "That's not what I asked." He didn't answer. The silence stretched long enough that even the board members seemed uncomfortable. Finally, the older board member with the reading glasses spoke up. "Russell, I'm going to ask you plainly. Did the board authorize you to visit Mr. Combs's property, issue any notice, or place this item on an agenda without proper filing?" "No," Dade said, quieter this time. "Then on what authority did you do all three?" Dade straightened his papers again, buying time. "I believed it was in the district's best interest." "That's not a authority," she said. "That's an opinion." I stayed quiet and let the moment breathe. My father always said the best argument is the one you don't have to make out loud, because someone else makes it for you. The chairwoman turned to me. "Mr. Combs, do you have anything further?" "Only this," I said. "I've followed every rule since the day I filed for this permit. I paid my fees. I waited my time. I kept my paperwork clean for 3 years. I didn't ask for any of this dispute. I only want to keep using water I have every legal right to use." She nodded slowly, then looked at the rest of the board. "I move that Mr. Combs' permit remains valid, unchanged, with no further review required based on the evidence presented today. I further move that this board open a separate inquiry into the process failures raised here today." 2 other board members seconded the motion almost immediately. It passed without objection. Dade did not vote, and nobody asked him to. The chairwoman closed the hearing a few minutes later. As people started filing out, Dade approached me near the door. His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the edge underneath it. "You think this is over?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I think the truth usually wins if you give it enough paper," I said. He didn't answer that. He just walked past me toward his truck, jaw tight, eyes forward. Hank came up beside me as we walked to the parking lot. "You see his face when they mentioned an inquiry?" he said. "Man looked like he'd swallowed a hornet." I didn't smile. I didn't feel like celebrating yet. Men like Dade don't disappear quietly after a public loss. They regroup. They look for a new angle, a new pressure point, something less official and harder to trace back to them. I drove home that evening, turning it over in my mind. The permit was safe for now, but an inquiry into Dade's conduct meant he had more to lose than before. His title, maybe his seat on the board entirely. A cornered man with something to lose is more dangerous than one who has nothing on the line. I decided, right there in the truck, that I wasn't going to wait for his next move this time. I was going to be ready to catch it the moment it happened. The inquiry into Dade's conduct moved slowly, the way most county matters do. Weeks passed with no word. I kept working my land, kept my folder updated, and kept the trail camera running near my well just in case. It was Dolores who called me again, this time with something different in her voice. Not gossip, concern. "Walter," she said, "I think Russell's planning something. He's been asking about mineral rights on your property. Asked me twice this week if there were any old, unrecorded easements tied to your land." That caught me off guard. Mineral rights and easements had nothing to do with a well permit dispute. I thanked her and hung up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Dade was looking for a different door to come through now that the front one had been shut in his face. I spent that evening pulling my property's title history from the courthouse records. Everything was clean. No unrecorded easements. No mineral rights disputes. My father had bought the land outright decades ago, and every transaction since had been properly filed. A few days later, I got my answer about what Dade was really planning. Hank called me just after sundown, his voice tight. "Walter, you need to hear this. My cousin says Dade's been telling people at the district office that your permit was approved through a clerical mistake. Says he's planning to file paperwork claiming the well was never legally valid in the first place, going back to day one." I sat with that for a moment. If Dade could convince the board the original permit approval was invalid, he wouldn't need a new violation. He could try to erase mine from 3 years ago, as if it had never existed at all. I realized then I needed more than paper this time. I needed something that could not be twisted, reinterpreted, or buried in a filing cabinet. I needed proof of exactly how Dade operated, in his own words, on the record. I thought about the trail camera near my well. It had caught nothing so far except deer and the occasional coyote. That wasn't going to be enough. So I made a decision. If Dade wanted to visit my property again under some new pretext, I wasn't going to stop him. I was going to let him come, and this time, I would be ready with more than a hidden lens in a mesquite tree. I drove into town the next morning and bought a small audio recorder, the legal kind, the kind allowed under Texas's one-party consent law, meaning I only needed my own consent to record a conversation I was part of. I checked that law twice before I bought anything, because I wasn't going to build my defense on a mistake. I clipped the recorder to my shirt pocket that same week and started wearing it every time I worked near the well, every time I checked the mail, every time I drove into town. I didn't know when Dade would show up again, but I intended to be recording the moment he did. I didn't have to wait long. 9 days later, on a warm Friday afternoon, I saw the same white truck pull up to my gate. I was in the barn, but I'd left the door open enough to see the driveway. My recorder was already clipped inside my shirt pocket, running, the way it had been every day since I bought it. I walked out to meet him, calm, unhurried, the way I always tried to carry myself. "Mr. Combs," Dade said, stepping out of his truck. He wasn't wearing his usual pressed shirt this time. He looked tired, like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. "Mr. Dade," I said, "something I can help you with?" "I wanted to talk to you directly," he said, "man to man, no board, no hearing." "All right," I said, "talk." He glanced around the property, then lowered his voice, even though there was nobody else within a mile of us. "I know how to make this inquiry against me disappear," he said, "and I know how to make sure nobody ever questions your permit again either. But I need something from you." "What's that?" "I need you to tell the board you misspoke at the hearing. Say you weren't sure if I filed a formal complaint. Say maybe you were mistaken about the timeline, just enough doubt to take the pressure off me." I kept my voice even. "You're asking me to lie." "I'm asking you to help a man who's been doing this job a long time," he said. "I made a mistake pushing too hard on your well, I'll admit that to you, just you, right now. But if this inquiry goes forward, I lose my position, my pension, everything." "And if I don't help you?" He hesitated, and something in his face shifted, harder, colder. "Then maybe that mineral rights question doesn't go away so easy. Maybe somebody finds a real problem with your title next time. Things get complicated for people who make my life complicated." There it was. Not quite a direct threat, but close enough that any reasonable person would understand it as one. I felt something settle in my chest, steady and certain. He had just handed me exactly what I needed. "I appreciate you being honest with me," I said, keeping my voice level. "But I'm not going to lie to the board. I told them the truth the first time, and I'll tell them the truth every time after that." Dade's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, Combs." "Maybe," I said, "but it'll be my mistake, made with a clean conscience." He didn't say anything else. He got back in his truck and drove off, gravel kicking up behind his tires. I stood there for a moment, then walked straight into the house and unclipped the recorder with shaking hands, not from fear, but from knowing exactly what I now held. I sat at my kitchen table that night and listened to the recording 3 times, start to finish. Every word was clear. His offer to make the inquiry disappear, his request that I lie to the board, and the veiled threat about my mineral rights, wrapped just carefully enough that a careless listener might miss it, but plain enough that no reasonable person could mistake it for anything else. I did not rush. I wrote out a full transcript by hand first, word for word, then typed it up and printed 3 copies. I labeled the recording file with the date and time, and I backed it up in 2 separate places. A flash drive I kept in my truck, and another I mailed to myself, unopened, so the postmark would stand as its own proof of the date it existed. My father used to say that evidence you can't date is evidence you can't trust. I wasn't going to let anyone claim later that I'd made this up after the fact. The next morning, I called Dolores. I didn't tell her everything, only that I had new information relevant to the ongoing inquiry into Russell Dade. She gave me the name of the county attorney's office handling the matter, a woman named Patricia Fenwick. I drove into town that same day and requested a meeting. Fenwick was a serious woman, maybe 45, with sharp eyes that didn't waste time on small talk. I laid my folder on her desk, the permit, the maps, the surveyor letter, the bylaws, and then I placed the flash drive on top of it all. "There's a recording on here," I said, "from yesterday afternoon. Russell Dade asked me to lie to the board about the hearing and made what I believe was a threat against my property if I refused." She looked at me carefully. "You recorded this without his knowledge?" "Texas is a one-party consent state," I said. "I checked before I ever turned it on. I was a party to the conversation. I only needed my own consent." She nodded slowly, already reaching for a legal pad. "Play it for me." I did. The room was silent except for Dade's voice coming through my phone's speaker, offer after offer, threat folded inside a favor. When it ended, Fenwick sat back in her chair for a long moment. "This changes things considerably," she said. "This isn't just a permit dispute anymore. This is coercion, possible abuse of office, and potentially extortion, depending on how the mineral rights comment is interpreted." Word moves fast in a small county, even when people try to keep it quiet. Within a week, I got a call from a reporter at the regional paper, a young man named Corey Blevins, who had heard through a source at the courthouse that something big was happening with the water district. I thought carefully before agreeing to speak with him. I decided the truth, told calmly, in my own words, with documentation to back it up, was better than letting rumors fill the gap. I met him at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd built my case from the beginning, and I laid out the same folder for him that I'd shown Fenwick. "I never wanted any of this," I told him. "I just wanted to keep my water rights, the ones I earned fair and legal. Everything else he brought to my door." The story ran the following Sunday. It was careful, factual, sourced. It didn't accuse Dade of anything the evidence didn't support, but it laid out the timeline clearly enough that anyone reading it could see exactly what had happened. By Monday morning, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Most of the calls were from neighbors, people I'd known for years, offering support in their own quiet way. Hank showed up Monday afternoon with a thermos of coffee and sat with me on the porch for an hour, not saying much, just being there. But not every response was friendly. 2 calls came from numbers I didn't recognize, no names given, just a voice telling me I should watch my fence lines and be careful what happens to a man's cattle out here. I wrote down the exact time of each call, the number if it showed on my phone, and everything that was said, word for word, while it was still fresh. I called Fenwick immediately after the second call. "I want this on record," I said. "I'm not making accusations about who's behind it, but I want it documented." "Good instinct," she said. "Keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Write everything down, date everything, and don't engage with anyone making these calls." The district board held an emergency session that Wednesday, this time with far more people in attendance than any meeting I'd seen before. Word of the newspaper article had spread through the whole county by then. Even people who didn't know me personally came out, curious, concerned about what it meant for their own water rights if something like this could happen to a landowner with a clean, legal permit. Dade did not attend the meeting. His seat at the front table sat empty, a folded name placard still resting where he usually sat. The chairwoman opened the session by announcing that, based on the ongoing county attorney inquiry and new evidence submitted, the board was placing Russell Dade on immediate suspension from his position, pending further legal proceedings. The room broke into low murmurs, not celebration exactly, but something close to relief. I sat in the back row again, same as always, folder in my lap, and said nothing. I didn't need to say anything anymore. The paper had done the talking from the very beginning, and now it was doing the talking in front of the whole county. After the meeting, Fenwick found me in the parking lot. "The district attorney's office is taking this seriously," she said. "Given the recording, the pattern of conduct, and now these calls you've been receiving, they're considering formal charges. This may go to court, Walter. I need you ready for that." I told her I was ready. I had been ready since the day I filed that first entry in my folder, the day Dade told me he set the rules around here. I drove home that evening past the old mesquite tree by my well, the same well that had started all of this. The water was still running clean, same as it always had. Nothing about my land had changed. Only the man who'd tried to take it from me had changed, and not for the better. The trial, when it finally came, was held nearly 4 months later in the county courthouse, the same building where I'd once filed my first well permit application without a second thought. I never imagined I would walk through those doors again for something like this. Fenwick had explained the charges to me carefully in the weeks leading up to it. Abuse of official capacity, attempted coercion. The extortion charge tied to the mineral rights threat had been reduced during negotiations, but the core of it remained. Dade had used his position to threaten a landowner and attempted to obstruct a formal inquiry into his own conduct. I sat in the gallery on the first day, dressed plain, my folder resting on my knees out of habit more than necessity by that point. Fenwick had copies of everything already filed with the court: the permit, the maps, the surveyor letter, the bylaws, and the recording, now transcribed and entered as evidence. Dade's attorney, a sharp younger man from a firm 2 counties over, tried early to have the recording thrown out. He argued it violated some expectation of privacy, that Dade hadn't known he was being recorded on private property during what he called an informal conversation between neighbors. The judge, a steady older woman named Judge Alvarez, was unmoved. "Texas is a one-party consent state," she said, echoing almost exactly what Fenwick had told me the first day I brought her the flash drive. Mr. Combs was a party to the conversation. The recording stands. I felt something ease in my chest hearing that. Every piece of paper, every certified copy, every careful step I'd taken from the very first unsigned letter had led to this moment, and none of it had been wasted. The prosecution called Dolores first, who testified about Dade's repeated visits to the courthouse, his questions about my permit filing date, and later his questions about mineral rights and unrecorded easements. She was steady on the stand, answering plainly, never embellishing. Then they called Elias Vance, my surveyor friend, who walked the jury through the maps and confirmed under oath what he'd already put in writing. My well sat nearly 2 miles from any aquifer boundary Dade had claimed a violation over. When it was my turn to testify, I kept my answers short and factual, the way I'd learned to speak in every board meeting since this began. Fenwick asked me to walk the jury through the timeline, from the first unannounced visit to the recorded conversation at my gate. I did, without raising my voice, without reaching for sympathy. I simply told them what happened, in the order it happened, and let the documents and evidence confirm each part as I went. On cross-examination, Dade's attorney tried a different approach. He suggested I had baited Dade into that conversation at my gate, that I'd warned the recorder specifically hoping to trap him into saying something incriminating. I wore it because I had reason to believe he might return to my property again without proper authority, I said, just as he had before. I didn't put words in his mouth. I only recorded the words that came out of it. The attorney didn't have much of a follow-up to that. He moved on. The trial's second week focused mostly on the recording itself. The prosecution played it in full for the jury, Dade's own voice filling the courtroom, offering to make the inquiry disappear in exchange for my silence, then sliding into the veiled threat about my mineral rights. I watched several jurors' faces change as they listened, the same shift I imagine my own face had made the first time I heard it play back in my kitchen. Dade testified in his own defense on the third day. He claimed he had only been trying to smooth things over between two reasonable men, that his words had been taken out of context, that he never meant any harm by mentioning mineral rights, that it had simply been an offhand remark. Fenwick's cross-examination was patient but precise. She asked him to explain, in his own words, what exactly he meant when he told me that things get complicated for people who make my life complicated. Dade stumbled through an answer about general frustration, nothing more. She let the silence after his answer sit in the room for a long moment before moving on, and I could see on the jury's faces that the silence said more than his explanation had. She also walked him through the timeline of his visits to the courthouse, his questions to Dolores about my filing date, then later about unrecorded easements and mineral rights, entirely unrelated to any well permit review. "What legitimate district business," she asked him, "requires the district president to research a landowner's mineral rights during an active well permit dispute?" Dade didn't have a clean answer for that either. The defense's closing argument leaned heavily on Dade's years of service to the district, his reputation before this dispute, his family, his standing in the community. His attorney asked the jury to see this as a misunderstanding between two strong-willed men, not a crime. Fenwick's closing was shorter and calmer than I expected. She reminded the jury that this case wasn't about strong wills. It was about a public official who used his office to threaten a private landowner into silence, caught in his own words, on a recording nobody had coached or scripted. She reminded them that I had never once raised my voice, never once retaliated, never once done anything but follow the law and keep records, exactly as any citizen should be able to do, without fear of losing their water rights over it. "Mr. Combs did what all of us hope we would do in his position," she told the jury. "He stayed calm. He stayed lawful. He let the truth speak for itself. Now it's your turn to let it be heard." The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. I spent that time on a bench outside the courtroom with Hank, who had driven in that morning just to sit with me, saying little, the way he always did when it mattered most. When the bailiff called us back in, I stood with my hands folded in front of me, my folder finally closed and resting under my arm, no longer needed in the fight, only as a record of how far it had come. Judge Alvarez asked the jury foreman to stand. I kept my eyes forward, steady, the same way I'd carried myself through every board meeting, every hearing, every quiet moment of doubt over the past several months. On the charge of abuse of official capacity, the foreman read, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of attempted coercion, he continued, we find the defendant guilty. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just felt something settle inside me, quiet and complete, the way a fence post settles once it's finally been driven deep enough to hold. Judge Alvarez thanked the jury for their service and scheduled sentencing for a later date. Before adjourning, she looked out over the courtroom and added a few words of her own, something I hadn't expected from a judge mid-proceeding. I want to note for the record, she said, that this case stands as an example of what proper documentation can accomplish. Mr. Combs did not retaliate. He did not escalate. He simply kept records, followed the law, and let the process work as it was designed to. That is exactly how a citizen should respond to an abuse of authority. I felt Hank's hand on my shoulder from the row behind me. I didn't turn around. I just let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since that first Tuesday morning when a white truck pulled up to my gate. Outside the courthouse, reporters were waiting, including Corey Blevins from the regional paper. I answered a few questions plainly, the same way I'd answered everything from the start. "Do you feel vindicated, Mr. Combs?" one reporter asked. "I feel like the system worked the way it's supposed to," I said. "That's enough for me." Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Dade was removed permanently from any public office in the county, barred from holding elected or appointed position for a set number of years, and given a suspended sentence with probation, along with a fine and mandatory restitution for legal costs tied to the inquiry. He avoided prison time, which some in town felt was too light, but I didn't spend much energy on that. My goal had never been to see him locked away. My goal had only ever been to keep what was legally mine, and to make sure the truth was heard clearly enough that nobody could twist it again. As I walked out of the courthouse that final day, folder tucked under my arm one last time, I thought about my father's voice, the same words he'd told me as a boy walking fence lines with him. "Paper outlives memory, Walter. Keep your paper straight." I had, and in the end, it was enough. Life on the ranch slowly returned to its old rhythm after the trial ended. I woke before sunrise, fed the cattle, checked the fence lines, walked the property just to listen to it, same as I always had. The well by the mesquite tree kept running clean, same as it always had too. Nothing about my land had ever needed fixing. Only the threat against it had needed removing, and now it was gone. The district held elections for a new board president a few months later. The seat went to the older board member with the reading glasses, the one who had asked Dade the hard questions that first night I stood up in that meeting. Under her leadership, the district adopted new written procedures requiring formal notice, a documented complaint, and a full board vote before any well permit could be reviewed or challenged. Dolores told me later that people at the courthouse had started calling it the Combs Rule, though nobody made it official on paper. I didn't need it to be. Knowing it existed was enough. Hank and I still talk most weeks, usually over coffee on my porch, same as we did the day the newspaper article first ran. He likes to remind me, every so often, that I could have handled things differently, louder, angrier, faster. I always tell him the same thing back. Loud arguments get forgotten by the next season. Paper trails outlast everyone involved, including the people who tried to bury them. Dolores still works at the courthouse. She tells me sometimes that new landowners come in nervous about their own permits, worried some official might try what Dade tried on me. She always points them toward keeping good records from day one, filing everything properly, and never letting an unofficial conversation replace a documented one. I like knowing that something good came out of all of it, even indirectly, even for people I'll never meet. As for Dade, I heard through town gossip, the same way I first heard about him all those months ago, that he moved out of the county not long after his sentencing ended. Nobody seems to know exactly where he went, and honestly, I stopped wondering a while back. I never wanted revenge against the man. I only ever wanted my water rights left alone, and the truth told plainly enough that nobody could twist it into something else. My permit file still sits in my desk drawer, same folder my father once told me to keep straight. It's thicker now than it used to be, filled with certified copies, maps, letters, and a transcript of a recording I never wanted to make but was glad I did. I don't look through it often anymore. I don't need to. I know exactly what's in it, and I know it held up when it mattered most. I think back sometimes to that first Tuesday morning, the white truck at my gate, a man with a clipboard telling me he set the rules around here. I was just a rancher standing by his own well, holding a permit I'd earned the honest way. I didn't know then how far it would go, or how much it would test my patience to stay calm through all of it. But I understand now why my father taught me the way he did. He never told me to fight loud. He told me to fight straight. Keep your paper in order. Tell the truth the same way every time you're asked. Let the record speak when your voice alone isn't enough to be believed. That's what carried me through every meeting, every hearing, every quiet evening spent organizing a folder that grew heavier by the month. Not anger, not revenge, just steady, patient documentation, built one honest page at a time. I think about the other landowners in this county too, the ones who might face something similar someday. Someone in a position of small power deciding to test how far they can push before somebody pushes back. I hope if that day comes for them, they remember what worked for me. Stay calm. Write everything down. Get everything in writing. Let the law do what the law is designed to do. Because in the end, that's exactly what happened here. The law worked, not because I shouted loud enough to be heard, but because I kept quiet enough and organized enough that when it finally came time to speak, every word I said could be proven true. My well still runs clean under that old mesquite tree. My cattle still drink from it every morning, same as they always have. My land is still mine, exactly as it was the day I filed that permit 3 years before any of this began. Some things never needed changing. They only needed defending, patiently, honestly, one document at a time. That's the whole of it. That's how a quiet rancher outlasted a man who thought his title made him untouchable. Not through anger, through paper, patience, and the plain, steady truth.